Far from the border, ICE raids and arrests in cities across the country. Boston, New York, and Newark, New Jersey. Some of them likely long planned, but a clear...
So ICE raids are now happening across the Northeast, and thousands of people in the country unlawfully are now being removed. However, a new report has just come out revealing that New York is home to 670,000 people who aren't supposed to be here, and 58,000 of those people are folks with a prior criminal conviction, which means that the thousands of people arrested by ICE so far are nothing compared to what's coming next.
The Trump administration expanding a fast-track deportation for hundreds, which means enforcement agents can deport without requiring them to appear before an immigration judge. We have the worry, what will happen with us? Will they deport us? Will they give us asylum or not? He's one of many living in a New York City migrant shelter.
ICE agents have arrested more than 1,300 undocumented immigrants, which includes more than 1,000 criminals.
Here in New York, an alleged El Salvadorian MS-13 gang member, a Jamaican citizen facing charges, and a Honduran citizen convicted of drunk driving.
We know that there are well over 5 million households with a U.S. citizen, child, or spouse. These families will effectively be separated or forced to make decisions.
Meanwhile, federal government's put out a list of the people that have been apprehended, of whom who has reckless bodily harm on his rap sheet. He has burglary, assault with a deadly weapon, and more. So those are the kind of winners that Democrats seem to be protecting right now.
So New York State is harboring 670,000 people who are not supposed to be here. But what nobody defending sanctuary cities wants to admit is that by allowing massive numbers of illegal residents to reside in them, these places just become magnets for criminals and gang members who exploit the other unlawful residents of these places and have a lot to do with why sanctuary cities are such a safety nightmare in general. But with ICE ramping up targeted operations with the goal of removing dangerous individuals and national security threats from our country, sanctuary cities like New York are about to get a whole lot safer than they've been over the past few years. Although they'll remain magnets for crime as their huge populations of those without legal status have them in the sights of human traffickers, businesses that exploit their workers, and gangs looking for new members. Something gangs like Venezuela's Tren de Aragua have been surprisingly effective at right here in New York, which does everything it can to help a person remain here long after an immigration judge has ordered them out of the country. And due to New York's lax legal system, after gang members here get arrested, they get released back into the general public instead of into federal custody where they belong. Plus, our laws that decriminalize theft, robbery, and assault basically make this place a playground for budding criminals looking to achieve their own twisted version of the American dream. And that brings us to the real reason why raids targeting criminals and gang members, the worst of the worst, are ramping up. These criminals have entire empires built on the backs of other illegal residents who are the people sanctuary city leaders claim they truly care about. And here you've got illegal criminals threatening other people who aren't supposed to be in the country, forcing them to do their dirty work. These criminals also profit from selling or renting fake IDs and identities to people who aren't supposed to be here, want normal jobs, but can't get them. And with over 400,000 such residents in New York City alone, ICE raids here are set to become more common in everyday locations and businesses as the federal government tries to root out dangerous offenders. Plus, as you're about to see, when ICE raids a harmless-looking apartment or business, oftentimes the people they take down have been convicted of something serious. So here we are by a slew of local businesses in lower Manhattan, and in New York City you've got over 400,000 people living here who don't have a legal right to be in the country, yet somehow have to pay rent and buy food and take care of themselves, and some of those folks are going to be working at businesses just like these. However, as we're learning from these recent ICE raids, there's a chance that some of these individuals could be folks with a very dangerous criminal past.
Our focus on arresting public safety threats and national security threats. That's exactly what we're doing now.
ICE agents have arrested more than 1,300 undocumented immigrants, which includes more than 1,000 criminals. The other 300 or so are what he calls collateral damage, which means illegal aliens who may not be public safety threats, but were arrested nonetheless by being in proximity.
So already over 1,000 criminal arrests all throughout the Northeast. In some cases, these are arrests that are happening at small businesses that have been part of their communities for years. But ICE isn't just looking for anybody. They're going after the worst of the worst. Criminals, gangs, terror watch list suspects, some of whom were apparently working at a local seafood restaurant in New Jersey, where ICE agents ended up detaining a whole bunch of people who couldn't prove they had a right to stay in America. But that's not all. ICE agents now have permission to go into sensitive areas like hospitals, schools, churches, and other places that used to be off limits. And almost immediately, these are the folks they're finding, like this gang member with 17 prior criminal convictions. That's insane. And if you thought it was bad enough that this country is full of hardened criminals hiding in plain sight while appearing to work a normal job in an illegal manner, other dangerous criminals have found ways to profit from laws that encourage people with deportation orders to hide in sanctuary cities. Something that could not happen if people weren't getting help from the local government to break federal laws. This is how you get gang members smuggling weapons into shelters for asylum seekers. Weapons which they use to intimidate people into working at this shady business that didn't have a sign on it, which was recently shut down in Queens and was across the street from an elementary school. And if gangs with guns are all over the place, it's only going to take a few people initially to get the ball rolling down the slippery slope of crime that New York City is now unable to stop. You've got new recruits riding around on mopeds, committing snatch and grab robberies while posing as DoorDash delivery riders. And in certain areas of town, you can buy whatever you want from a van for way less than it cost in whatever store these items came from originally. And obviously, it's ridiculous that these folks are able to have normal jobs or live a normal looking life in a city like New York. But what's even more ridiculous is the fact that a lot of them were already in jail and in custody at one point when they were released to come back out here on the streets and make life worse for everybody.
Bowman says he hopes those cities begin to see the progress they're making and allow ICE agents into county jails to arrest those violent criminals.
They're not letting us into county jail because of sanctuary laws. If we can arrest the bad guy and the safety and security of a jail, which is safer for the officer, safer for the alien, safer for the community.
So it's one thing to encourage rampant criminality by helping people violate federal immigration law all across your city and state. However, many of these people are encouraged to commit the same types of crimes that wound them up in jail in the first place, because here we don't have any consequences for crime. And our police are banned from coordinating with ICE when they arrest somebody who's dangerous, and that person gets sent right back out into whatever community they were taken down in, which is now forcing ICE to go into places like hospitals, businesses, restaurants, construction sites, all to find people who should not be free to walk our streets in the first place. And although the ICE director has made it pretty clear that he's not trying to go out and find regular people who are here unlawfully, he's just focused on criminals and gang members, those criminals and gang members get the fuel they need to survive from these large unlawful populations just by virtue of those folks being here when they're not supposed to be. Let's say you want to get a job at a local restaurant. Well, you're going to need something that only a gang can give you, and that would be some way to prove that you are legally allowed to be employed in a place like this when that is actually not the case. And that would be something like a green card or a fake ID or a social security card, which you can buy here on the streets of New York for around $80 to $250 on Roosevelt Avenue in Queens, which is a middle-class neighborhood with strong immigrant roots. And this does a few things to that neighborhood, all of which are terrible. First, you've got a neighborhood full of legal immigrants that is now home to criminal gangs making money. That's bad. That just leads to more crime in a community. Second of all, these gang members are exploiting people who have been ordered to leave the country but are still here, who then in turn exploit local businesses by going in there and getting hired for something when they aren't actually supposed to be working. These businesses, they can get in a lot of trouble if it's found out they've hired people with fraudulent documents. But since these sanctuary cities and states won't lock up their criminals or cooperate with ICE, that in turn forces ICE agents to go to these very same businesses looking for people who they may have identified as being extremely dangerous.
Boston, New York, and Newark, New Jersey. Newark's mayor saying agents raided a small business without a warrant.
People were fingerprinted. Pictures of their IDs and face were taken.
So here you have a seafood place in New Jersey which was raided, but New Jersey's a sanctuary state, and you have the mayor who's all upset that people in his state were asked for their paperwork when right over here in New York you can buy fake versions of the paperwork that people are showing to get these jobs in the first place. days. Now, apparently in this ICE raid, 8 people were detained, 5 were released, and 3 were taken into custody. But one of the people who was released apparently was a U.S. citizen. But look at this, with gang members openly selling fake IDs, ICE agents have no choice but to question the validity of paperwork they receive, especially when they're raiding a place looking for somebody who they believe is extremely dangerous. And here you have the mayor of a place that's engaging in criminal behavior, harboring criminals, all upset that somehow the law-abiding in his state are getting swept into a federal operation to get rid of folks who are trouble. And that brings us to the next major problem with sanctuary city laws and policies. Those policies do nothing but destroy the lives of the law-abiding, especially when the federal government has to take action. Actions which they have to take to protect people, and as you're about to see, that makes living in a sanctuary city one of the most dangerous places you could possibly live anywhere in America. So this lovely place is the courthouse, and we're right by the entrance for all of the Department of Corrections transport vehicles. And one thing that the critics of these deportations miss is that a lot of times the people who are being deported were already in one of these buses or inside this building. They were convicted of something and then they were released. Not even because of sanctuary city policies, but because of other stupid policies in place in cities like New York.
The bad, hard criminals out. These are people that have been as bad as you get. We're taking them out first.
Federal government's put out a list of the people that have been apprehended, one of whom has reckless bodily harm on his rap sheet. He has burglary, assault with a deadly weapon, and more. So
the only way you get to a point where people with that type of background are roaming your streets is if your legal system has been completely defeated by these criminals. But what's fascinating is you've got lawmakers and activists in sanctuary cities speaking up for the types of criminals who are putting people in ambulances. And even though Donald Trump won a landslide presidential election with both the popular vote and all the swing states, you've still got people in cities like New York that hate the new president so much they're willing to stick up for those who have harmed their own voters. And that's especially frightening. Here you've got this Venezuelan Tren de Aragua. They've racked up hundreds of arrests in a very short period of time. And this article says that many of the gang members arrested have been on felony charges of robbery and grand larceny, but also on charges of assault and car theft. What in the world are we doing here? How on earth can we be defending people who go out and do stuff like this? Why do we want them to stay in our country? That's ludicrous.
This man from Venezuela didn't want to show his face, but he opened up about how he and other migrants are feeling about the threat of mass deportations under the new Trump administration. We have the worry. What will happen with us? Will they deport us? Will they give us asylum or not? Will they not help with the work permit? He's one of many living in a New York City migrant shelter.
So I don't know who that guy was. I don't know why he's covering his face. But if he's an asylum seeker, he's got this thing called parole, which allows him to remain in America while his asylum case plays out. And during that time, he can't be deported if he doesn't have any interactions with ICE. Because one of the things that is just ticking off the progressive zero borders crowd is this new fast-track deportations process. And if ICE encounters a criminal, they are now apparently allowed to assess whether or not that criminal should be allowed to keep their parole status. And people who don't have parole status can be deported. And if they've been here for less than 2 years, they don't even go to immigration court. And this also applies to people who may have enlisted the help of cartels, gangs, or smugglers to get into the country without going through an official border checkpoint. And these are people who New York City has been perfectly happy welcoming into its shelters, some of whom have turned out to be dangerous criminals themselves. And we've already seen how people not in the country legally open themselves and wherever they live up to more criminal activity.
And when we talk about, as Harris was saying, those leaders that talk about protecting people, the reality is that the Americans were left unprotected for the last 4 years, and that these terrible rap sheets, the viciousness of these recidivists here, the reality is a lot of...
So these gang members, these criminals, these recidivists, they're here profiting from a system that allows people to live here who need the help of the criminal underworld to survive and get by. That's why they're here. That's why they're selling fake IDs, to help people get jobs they don't qualify for. And they take advantage of our lax laws to steal whatever they want, because you can't go to jail for stealing here, and then turn around and sell that stuff on the side of the street somewhere. It's ridiculous, and there's nothing that New York's local laws can do about it. And look at this, we've even got known gang members living in the Roosevelt Hotel, which is the welcome center for asylum seekers, right in the center of Midtown Manhattan. This is the first place people go when they come here seeking a shelter bed, and the gangs are here waiting for them. It's crazy. And the NYPD's found 41 people like this guy who have a combined 150 arrests in 2024. Yet here we help these people violate federal immigration law, and we give them unlimited get-out-of-jail-free cards, so every time they do something wrong, they can just get to go and do it again. And while these laws exist, more of these apex criminals, as we'll call them, they're gonna come here because they get to be at the top of a food chain that profits from lawlessness all across the spectrum. Do you think these ICE raids are gonna make sanctuary cities like New York less dangerous? And how effective do you think these raids are going to be if places like New York are allowed to stay as sanctuary cities long into the future? Couldn't these same problems come back? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.